Hello, I'm Edward James Olmos. Please join me from our nation's capital as we follow the historic journey of the Names Project Quilt, a memorial to people fallen by AIDS. Remember My Name, tonight at 8 on Channel 5.
This AIDS Lifeline presentation is being brought to you in the public interest by Metropolitan Life Insurance and by Digital Equipment Corporation.
Let the world know this, that the thousands who have already died of AIDS are not mere statistics. They are not numbers. They are our inspiration. And like you, like me, they have names. Names that call out to us from every part of this massive quilt. Remember us, they say. Remember our names and keep them sacred, because there is not one amongst us that wanted to die.
Claire Harwood.
A giant quilt is unfolded, unlike any the world has ever seen. 12,000 pounds and stitched with the names of thousands who have died of AIDS.
Richard Eidemann.
Earlier this year, this ceremony was repeated in cities all over the country, where people rallied against this devastating disease.
Someday, I may have my own place of honor on this living memorial that has been sown so sweetly by those left behind. If I do, I ask of you but one thing. Remember my name, too. My name is Michael Katz.
The Names Project Quilt traveled over 10,000 miles throughout America. Along the way, it uncovered a nation coming to grips with a killer epidemic. What's in a name?
Skip Brewer.
A symbol of our spirit?
Dennis Yount.
Our claim to individuality, maybe even immortality.
Mark O'Brien.
Hello, I'm Edward James Olmos. It's hard to deny the power of names, especially after you've seen the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C. Well, we're not far from that memorial, here on the Capitol Mall, where thousands of other names have been laid out. They are the fallen victims of another kind of war that still rages on, the AIDS epidemic. This is the Names Project Quilt, a national memorial to the people who have died of AIDS. There are 8,000 names on this quilt, just a fraction of the nation's total. This display marks the end of a historic trip that began last spring.
Hold on. That should be it.
It started in San Francisco, where the first patch of the quilt was created. Then last April, a small group set out on a journey with the quilt. A journey that took them across America and to people from all walks of life. In every part of this land, the quilt became a symbol for those who have died and those who still struggle with this deadly disease. Like the 7-year-old boy with AIDS in Illinois, who sparked a battle over his right to go to school with other children.
And now, after we provide a school for her, my kid's in there with a kid with AIDS.
Say there isn't time for
Or a
this
young
now.
lawyer in a small Connecticut town who discovers he has AIDS and his family is torn apart.
What we were surprised by with my parents was that even when they were requested and told that Jimmy had asked for them, they refused to come and see him before he died.
And the minister and his wife in rural Louisiana, who must stand before the congregation and announce that they have AIDS.
The only thing I felt I could do was just place us in the hands of these people and their response, and hope and pray for the best.
Tonight you're going on a journey to meet these extraordinary people. A trip that reveals America in the midst of a painful crisis. It is a journey that goes to the very heart of this country. When the quilt came to St. Louis early one morning, a group of volunteers was there to meet it.
You can just stack them up. There's a whole series of small ones. Let me give
For many of them, the quilt's arrival was the climax of an emotional effort that had begun earlier this year.
Gary Pennebecker is pink right here.
One of the volunteers was Trish Pfeiffer Harwig, a wife and mother who works as a personnel consultant for large corporations.
Just about know them by heart.
I got involved because I wanted to do something worthwhile in my community. And I heard about the memorial that had started in San Francisco, and I thought it was a beautiful tribute and something that was meaningful to me, and I know how to sew.
Trish and others put their sewing skills and other talents to work and started the first quilt workshop in the country last January. Eventually, workshops sprung up in every community where the quilt was displayed. It was a place where people could make panels for friends and loved ones, panels that would then be sewn onto the National Names Project quilt.
Lots of different people come to the workshop to work on panels. Sometimes fathers and mothers come to work on their children. Many times brothers or sisters come. And all the time friends come and lovers come. Yeah, and we can also kind of whip stitch around it like I did the badge, the sheriff's badge. When I make a panel for somebody, I do get emotionally involved.
Two sets of baseball cards.
One of the ones that I was working on today and finishing up was for Nicholas Perales. And Nicholas Perales, at first, was just a name in the files, and we didn't know who it was, and we couldn't find out any information about it. And then at a meeting, we found out that Nicholas was 6 years old. And suddenly, I just felt real attached to that, and the idea that this 6-year-old boy wasn't here anymore, and here we had created sort of a jungle quilt. I mean, Nicholas Perales is a real child to me. The fact that I never saw him or held him here in my lap or any of that doesn't mean he wasn't real to me. He is.
Oh, beautiful, oh, spacious skies, oh, amber waves of grain, oh, purple mountains.
I remembered a line of a poem from Emily Dickinson in which she said, if I can stop one heart from breaking, I shall not have lived in vain. And I sort of feel that way about this experience. Maybe we just need the awareness of how. Maybe this will help bring that. That would make me happy.
From thy good with brotherhood, from sea to shining sea.
Just across the Mississippi River in another community hit by AIDS, the mood was different.
If any one of my children had AIDS, I'd have them tutored, because then I could spend, it takes 2 hours for a tutor to teach.
He wouldn't get to play with any other kids. He wouldn't grow up like a normal child.
I'd take them to the park.
Unlike St. Louis, AIDS has sparked fear and divided the town of Granite City, Illinois. It has pitted neighbor against neighbor over the fate of a 7-year-old boy.
Are you going to try real hard to be a big boy?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll try to.
Jason Robertson is a hemophiliac. 2 years ago, his mother Tammy learned that he was infected with the AIDS virus. He got it after receiving contaminated blood.
When it was suggested to me that I not tell anyone, then I thought that's what's breeding all this fear, all the hiding. I wanted to somehow help the AIDS issue by not hiding it.
Jason was placed in a special classroom isolated from the rest of his classmates.
He was very lonely. He actually was inventing playmates. He had this little doll called Mick that he carried around, and he ate with Mick, he played with Mick, he done everything with Mick. I thought he is absolutely desperate for friends. Yeah.
When Jason's mother won a court order to place him in a regular school classroom, it unleashed a furious battle.
You can pinch my arm, not my hand.
And now, after we provide a school for her, my kid's in there with a kid with AIDS.
You're trying to tell me that a kid with a disease that there is no known cure for is going to...
During a tense school board meeting, parents were outraged over the court decision.
I had not anticipated that strong of a reaction during that meeting. You know, everybody would scream and shout, you know, saying hurtful things about my child. That was the worst thing that I have ever experienced. And the crowd grew more and more hostile. They were hollering for us to leave town. They were threatening. They were saying they were going to burn the house down with a kid in it. And I wanted to leave. I just wanted to pack up and leave and get out of here.
They're making it like we're so mean and cruel-hearted. We are not. We are not. That is not right.
In any community, there's always a certain fanatics that's going to get carried away. But of the majority of the community, it's for Jason, and all we're trying to do is protect our children.
These parents have banded together to fight the court order. Jason, they say, belongs in a special school, away from their children.
I'm afraid of my son going to school, eating off the trays that Jason eats off from, and bringing it home and maybe giving it to his sisters.
In my own opinion, they haven't done enough studies on it to really sit there and pinpoint how it can be transmitted. As long as there's a possibility of it spreading, that's what we're trying to shut down. We don't want it to be spread.
I went to their meetings that they had, and I asked that doctor, were they 100% sure that they couldn't contact it that way? And he wouldn't tell me yes. He said it's not known to have happened.
It's not known.
See, they don't know everything, and they're just using our children as guinea pigs.
When Jason returned to a regular classroom, he was greeted by angry parents who continued their protest.
I felt I had no support, none at all. I didn't have a friend who was willing, not one, who was willing to stand up beside me. I wanted to help them get over their fear. I want to teach them that we don't know enough about how to cure it. We certainly don't know that. But there is enough known about modes of transmission.
How you doing? My name's Drew Callender, and we want to sit there and try and have the AIDS-related victims be identified as special individuals. That's what our petition's all about. So they're being bused to different schools that have the facilities to take care of their needs. And that's basically what we're asking.
I think that, I think he gets a little bit depressed about it sometimes. He asked me one time, he said, Mom, how long will we have this problem? How long will I have AIDS? And I said, Jesus made you special. You're always going to have it. And unfortunately, we'll probably always have to deal with this problem. So he has just come to the age where he understands the potential of AIDS, but I think that he feels better about himself now that he's in school, and now that he, that he sees, hey, I'm not a freak. I can make friends. I am a person.
Jason did make friends. In the end, it was his classmates who rallied to his side. These children may not have fully understood the issue splitting this community, but every kid understands the need to have someone to play with. But Jason never had a chance to return to school in September. Because of pressure from people in the community, the Robertson family decided to leave Granite City and move to another town. One month into the tour, the quilt headed towards Houston, Texas, where it had its largest display yet in the city's convention center. 240 Texans were commemorated in the display, and as in St. Louis, many of them were children. Among the names was Melissa Gonzalez.
I just think of her as like how brave she was, how strong she was. I have to admire her. She was so strong. I just wish I was that strong.
Melissa Gonzalez was 17 when she died of AIDS last year, but her struggle to live began when she was diagnosed with cancer in 1982. Her mother, Rosie, recalls a life spent in and out of hospitals.
She would take a treatment once a week, every 7 days. And then within 8 weeks, her tumor was in remission. Then she had to have a lung surgery because we found a spot in her lungs. And she had that one removed first. Then the second time, that's when her tumor started up at the back of her leg. So once it starts again, the doctor said she had to have the amputation. My husband and I cried and all this stuff, and she, not her, she says, Mom, if that's what has to be done, it has to be done.
After enduring 4 operations and 4 years of treatment, it appeared that Melissa was winning her battle against cancer. But then she started coming down with mysterious bouts of pneumonia, unrelated to her cancer. Tests revealed the worst.
In November 17th of '86, they told us that Melissa had AIDS, and she had gotten that through one of her blood transfusions in one of her 4 surgeries. That was in '83 and '84, when they weren't testing for AIDS at the hospital. It was like she had done with the cancer. She says, well, we'll just have to do it one day at a time, won't we? So she was all right. I was very mad because she went through a big illness, one of the worst illnesses there was. She beat that one, and then have to go through this AIDS, and then this was the one that killed her.
After Melissa died, Rosie decided to make a panel for her.
The things that I put on this panel are things that Melissa had done and things that had happened in her life and were going to happen in her life. For instance, she was in the neighborhood football team. She was in their cheerleading or drill team. We put the cap and the diploma because she would have graduated this year in May. And then we put this little angel for Mom. And then on here, her favorite pastime was her cassettes, her radio, and the last movie and the last tape she got was La Bamba. She saw that movie 3 times. And then we put the year that she was born and the year she died. She would have graduated this year. She had everything to go for. But I just had to put everything that she liked.
On the day of the quilt ceremony, the Gonzalez family saw Melissa's panel together for the first time.
Our family wasn't that close, but when she got sick, it was completely different. And since she's passed away, I mean, my son and his wife and my husband and myself, we've gotten real close, really close. I want people to know that Melissa didn't die for nothing.
New Orleans, a city alive with music, art, and tradition. Unique religious tradition that celebrates life and death. A city that now must face the reality of AIDS. The Gospel Soul Children, one of the Crescent City's premier gospel groups. They have lost 2 young members and one of their directors to AIDS. As the quilt arrived in New Orleans, the spread of AIDS was challenging the traditional role of the religious community. At the center of the controversy, Archbishop Philip Hannon, leader of the Catholic Church. In a city that's more than 60% Catholic, Hannon's power is considerable.
You're going to catch homosexuality from me?
He has used that power to ensure defeat of local ordinances that would have protected homosexuals from discrimination. But then he surprised many when he took up the cause of AIDS victims, many of whom in New Orleans are homosexuals. Hannon was responsible for opening the city's first home care residence for people with AIDS.
Well, I think that the church is and should be interested in the segment of society that needs help the most. And as I see it, the segment of society that needs help most are the AIDS patients. And so I thought that the church ought to address that fact, especially because nobody else was doing anything about it.
I'm not sure what message we should get from the Archbishop. Is it only gay people who are dying who are worthy of compassion and help and love? What about the 100,000 or so gay people in this city who are deprived of one of the most basic of human rights, the right to employment, the right to housing?
Richard Satcher is also involved in the AIDS crisis. Part of the profits from his nursery go to help support people who are forced into poverty by this disease. A lifelong Catholic, Satcher left the church recently because of what he calls the hypocrisy in the church leadership.
I see a double standard here. If he really believes that one has to be pro-life, then that means one has to love those who are alive and those who are healthy as well as those who are ill.
I personally don't see any contradiction in my position in helping the AIDS victims and the attitude of the church towards sin in general, sexual morality. What I'm doing is trying to follow the example of Christ, who took care of sinners. And I think that's exactly what the church is about. We are here to be saved by Christ because we all are sinners in different degrees. Stephen Garber, Bill Peters.
Despite the split between the bishop and the gay community, they joined together when the quilt was unveiled in New Orleans. Out of all the cities where the quilt traveled, Hannon was the only Catholic bishop who agreed to take part in the quilt ceremony.
Charles Macaulay.
The whole purpose of the quilt is to bring divergent people together. All kinds of people from every walk of life, from every political persuasion, religious persuasion. People may not understand what it means to be gay, and they may not understand AIDS, but they know what it means to die.
To die, not only in the big cities of the South, but in its small rural communities. AIDS is testing everyone's capacity for understanding.
I can't say that my life is over because that's not known. It's just a life that I knew is over. And now we have a different life. And I've had to learn to accept the fact that I no longer can do the things that I want to do. And every once in a while I get real depressed and I think, this isn't going to do. God's going to be with you, and no matter what happens, we can handle it somehow.
Ruth Smathers and her husband Stan live in the town of Lake Providence in northern Louisiana's Delta region. Stan is a Presbyterian minister. He and Ruth moved here 2 years ago to watch over a small congregation. They soon fell in love with Lake Providence.
We were really attracted to the people. Just warm, open people, and there's no pretense, I'll put it that way. I think that's a wonderful thing. And people just open their hearts to you.
Stan and Ruth were looking forward to a life of retirement here. Suddenly last year, their plans were changed forever.
It was a very vivid day. The doctor had called from Monroe and said to please come back that day. I had had 4 blood transfusions in '81. Oh, where? On the Gulf Coast. And they started then testing. And that's when they found it. But the doctor just brought me into his office and says, this is it, you know, you tested positive.
Sing praise to the
the news got worse. They later discovered that Ruth had infected Stan. Now they faced the prospect of telling the members of the church that they both had the AIDS virus.
I didn't feel I had any choice, really, because you can't hide it. And the only thing I felt I could do was just place us in the hands of these people and their response, and hope and pray for the best.
It was a real shock to find out they had AIDS. I remember one of the first thoughts I had was, what an embarrassing way to die.
Sitting in church was very hard. In fact, I cried for weeks.
You know, we was really worried in the church how other people was going to accept it.
Bad news travels fast in a small town. These were Lake Providence's first known cases of AIDS. To answer people's questions and concerns, the Smathers arranged for a town meeting and invited their doctor to speak to the gathering.
We were going to have them to our church, but it's not big enough, so we had to have it at the Baptist church, the biggest auditorium, and the place was packed with people from all over the community and some other communities too.
Well, we had a good doctor over there in Jackson came over and gave some talks and been a lot of reading and whatnot, and I just have to believe in what the experts are telling us. You know, I don't rely on my own opinion, and neither does Melba, my wife.
I wasn't surprised at all at the reaction because he made it so clear the way you contact AIDS and how it's transmitted, and there's no way we can get it from them. I was just overwhelmed, I guess, by the response of all the people. It wasn't just his church congregation. It was everyone in the community. And it was very heartwarming to see the reaction.
Volunteers from all denominations around the community are rallying behind the Smothers in their time of need.
The Smathers were big news as people responded to their plight by having an old-fashioned barn raiser to do repairs on their house.
Blueberry.
Later, when Ruth was bedridden, a group of women organized a kitchen brigade that cooked meals for the Smathers.
It's overwhelming, really, to know how really wonderful these people have been to us.
Again, I have raised the question, if it had been a single young man that came down as a first case of AIDS, what would have been the response of the community?
I don't think it would have been any different if it was a boy that had grown up here and they loved.
I think that was the thing. Though we had not lived here, a little more than 2 years, they had just taken us into their hearts. We were part of the community.
But not everyone in the community accepted the Smathers without reservation.
I was very apprehensive when we first found out that they had AIDS, about our contact with them and about them being our minister. I think I'm apprehensive because I don't know what my chances of contacting the disease are by contact with the Smathers. We shake hands with the preacher every Sunday morning after the sermon, and somehow maybe I don't shake hands as enthusiastically as I might have at other times.
Since their diagnosis, Stan has been healthy, but Ruth has gotten weaker. Yet they decided to remain in Lake Providence rather than move to a bigger city, even though they'd be closer to a hospital and their family.
We've been married in July 38 years, and we've always been close, but I would say it's brought us a lot closer.
We do it all together because not going to let the other one out of their sight that long, I think is what it is, you know. I go to the hospital, she goes with me. She goes to the hospital, I go with her. And whatever we've done together. I've always been kind of a pragmatist, I guess, in a lot of ways. Well, here's the situation, then what's the best we can make out of this situation? That is in the sense of not fighting against it. There's nothing you can fight against on this, but how do you roll with it and live with it and find some way that it can be of benefit to someone else?
Ruth Smathers died the evening of July 10th, 1988. Religion and family are powerful forces that bind us in the face of tragedy. This quilt is covered with the names of sons and daughters from all over America. However, all families do not respond to the impact of AIDS in the same way.
My name is Jim Hurley, and I've been asked to speak to you today because I have AIDS.
I try not to be overly concerned about my health. I try to...
Two young men talk about AIDS, videotaped shortly before their deaths. They faced the same disease. But their families reacted very differently. One man was rejected, while the other found acceptance.
Jimmy was energetic. He had a big mouth, and he'd be the first one to tell you that.
Right.
He was opinionated.
But one thing, Jim was always very honest.
But his honesty, I think, proved to be tremendous, especially with him having to deal with AIDS.
30-year-old James Hurley was just beginning a career in law when he was diagnosed with the virus.
And he sat down, and all he said was that I have AIDS. And Jane and I immediately hugged Jimmy, and we asked him, what can we do for you? And he said, I just want somebody who cares for me. And I want support.
That was his main concern, yeah.
That somebody loved him and was concerned for him and showed compassion towards what was happening to him.
Jimmy's sisters, along with two others, did show him compassion, but other members of his family, including Jimmy's parents, did not.
I also want to tell you that my parents and I haven't spoken since July. They said that this was the most embarrassing thing that had ever happened to them. They were so shocked that they would have to tell their friends I had AIDS. They offered to buy me a place in Florida where I would go and receive treatment, and no one here in Connecticut should know that I was ill.
My parents' reaction to want to keep this a secret didn't surprise us. Didn't surprise any of you, right?
Not at all.
Because I think people from that generation have a very difficult time dealing with anything that isn't totally accepted by society. And so we weren't very surprised. I think what we were surprised by with my parents was that even when they were requested and told that Jimmy had asked for them, they refused to come and see him before he died. Now that surprised us. That we found pretty shocking.
There was one incident when Jimmy was, his fevers, I think they were going up to, I don't know, like 102,
104.
103, 104, 4, 5, 6 times a day. And he sat on his couch crying, and he said, I know you're going to think I'm crazy, he said, but I want my mother. I think that's when we realized that my mother wasn't going to come. We kept hoping, and we kept trying, and we don't want to pass judgment on our parents, but that's the one thing I think we've had the hardest thing accepting is that they never did come in the end.
After Jimmy's diagnosis, his parents not only avoided seeing him, but they moved away and have stopped communicating with their daughters. Jimmy's illness, however, brought him closer to his sisters.
I think it has made us be a stronger family unit.
You do get a little bit of a sense at how short life may well be, and you make a much harder effort to get together.
10 days after making this educational video for a local college, Jimmy Hurley died. His sisters continue his efforts to educate the public, especially parents, about AIDS.
It doesn't make a difference how the person contracted AIDS. The fact that they have AIDS and they're going to die, it's a death sentence. And that's the message we have to parents, is don't turn away from them. The one time when your child needs you the most, be there. You have no reason to be fearful.
The other thing we really try to impress is that society has created this fear situation, and society has put this black mark out there that says this is really bad and we don't want anything to do with these people, and it's all nonsense.
I'm going to stop here, but I want to close by just saying once again, I have AIDS, and AIDS is not my problem any longer. AIDS is your problem, and I hope you'll do something about it. Thank you for listening.
Your parents are real neat, John.
Very special people.
Yeah.
Very outgoing, very loving, devoted and dedicated. And have been very supportive through the whole ordeal.
Yeah.
For Johnny Politano, AIDS created a bridge, not a wall, between himself and his parents. John and Josie were actually Johnny's aunt and uncle when they decided to adopt him as a baby.
He was a good boy. He was very loving, very caring, compassionate. He was a loving son. He was just one good
3
guy.
months old when we got him. And he was just a happy baby, always smiling.
But Johnny often ran away from home. He was troubled, initially about his adoption and later over his homosexuality.
He said to me, he said, Ma, he said, I'm gay. So I just looked at him, I said, so what? That doesn't make any difference to me. You're still my son. It doesn't, you know, doesn't bother me any. And he said to me, Ma, you're incredible. And that was that, you know, I mean, no big deal.
What I was saying before was when I said to Johnny, if you're gay and that's why you're running away for nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And his face got red and he turned his back to me. And I got up and I went over to him, I turned him around, I says, I told you before, I said, I don't care if you're gay.
That's right.
When Johnny was hospitalized with a bad case of pneumonia, his parents soon learned that it was much more serious.
Yeah, so what is it? He said, Mom, he said, I've been diagnosed as having AIDS. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know whether to scream. I didn't know whether to pull my hair out or what to do. I was just like, you know, my God.
When she told me what Johnny had, I think I went crazy there for a second, you know, and I went in his room and I punched the crucifix.
That's the crucifix that's on the wall now.
Splattered it, and I broke
punched
it
it right in half. Yeah.
And I was upset with Jesus Christ, you know, and I kept saying, why him? He's my only son. He's the only one.
When Johnny was close to death, they brought him home to die in his own bedroom.
I knelt down beside my son, and I held his hands, and I said to him, Johnny, I said, you know, you've been in pain a lot. And I said, you've been suffering a whole bunch. And I said, I don't want you to suffer no more. I said, I think it's time for you to go. I said, I don't want you to suffer no more. And he looked down at me and he gave me a wink with his eye. And he took a deep breath. And he just laid his head back, you know. And I went in there to check his pulse. There was no pulse. I tried it 4 times. There was no pulse. I said, Mama, I said, I think Johnny left us.
Their son's death was an ordeal that they endured without support from relatives.
Before he died, we had a party for Johnny on August the 10th. And Johnny was going to be 25 years old. And on August the 10th, we invited 110 of the family from both sides. Nobody came. This is Johnny's room. This is the room that John died in. It's the only room in the house that I can sit down and talk to my son, so to speak. I feel that he hears me. I tell him to, as long as I can help others, if I can help another mother, if I can help another father to understand, what good is religion if you turn your back on your son and he dies like an animal? For God's sakes, take him home before it's too late. Jesus Christ went amongst the lepers, and he hugged them, and he healed them, and he kissed them, and he wasn't afraid. Don't be afraid. He's your son, he's your daughter. Hug him, and you don't care what anybody says. He's your son. Grab him in your arms, hug him, squeeze him tight, because you're never going to see him again. It would be impossible to put everything on that quote that Johnny stood for.
My Johnny loved life, and plain and simple, that's the way I made it. We feel that every time we go out, if we reach just one mother and father, then that's one more boy or girl that has his parents to back him up, the way we backed up my Johnny.
Along the way, the quilt found many people living with AIDS. In Seattle, we'll meet two men who are battling public attitudes about their disease. Their stories when we return. In Seattle, one of the last stops on the Quilt's tour, two men were battling public attitudes about AIDS. For Ken Johnson, being open about his illness threatens to separate him from his daughter, while Stephen Farmer's AIDS status has forced him to confront the law. As in any city, Seattle's attitudes about AIDS are a mixture of tolerance as well as concern for controlling the spread of the disease. That concern recently focused on Seattle's street kids. In the back alleys and on these streets, it's always been a dangerous life. Now it's become a deadly one.
Living on the street, I'm very afraid of AIDS. That's where it's most, I'd say it's most widely spread, is on the streets, because there's so many kids out here that don't practice safe sex, and they don't value their lives as much as they should.
We got people out there who are taking advantage of them, who are infecting them. No one is protecting these kids.
Ann Rudnicki runs a shelter for street kids.
Some of them now, getting to be 20, 21, are getting sick from AIDS and dying. People have been murdering juvenile prostitutes for years. The AIDS epidemic is just a new way of doing it.
Last year, the realities of life on the street became a major news story because of this man, Stephen George Farmer, an airline flight attendant. Farmer paid for sex with two underage boys and took sexually explicit photos of them. Police charged Farmer with 4 sex offenses. During the trial, a revelation. Witnesses accused Farmer of knowing that he had the AIDS virus when he had unsafe sex with the street kids.
Did Mr. Farmer ever directly indicate to you that he was positive for the AIDS antibody?
Yes.
Farmer was convicted of the sex offenses, but now AIDS had become an issue in his sentencing.
In order that the defendant present himself...
The judge ordered Farmer tested for the HIV/AIDS virus to determine the severity of his sentence.
You are violating the law here. You are ignoring what the legislature said. And I am telling Mr. Farmer, and Mr. Iaria will tell Mr. Farmer, that he is not to comply with that order. Mr. Page, Mavis...
Michael Iaria is one of Stephen Farmer's attorneys. He argues that his client's privacy rights are being violated and that people's attitudes about AIDS are allowing it to happen.
AIDS is an emotional issue. I think the emotions, the hysteria, found their way into this case. And I think because of the emotions and the hysteria that Stephen Farmer did not get a fair trial. Just being convicted of a crime doesn't mean you open up your soul and your body to the state and the power of the state.
But State Prosecutor Rebecca Rose says the issue isn't individual rights, but the right of a community to protect itself from a deadly disease.
One of the major questions that every rape victim asks is, can I have an AIDS test, or can an AIDS test be performed on this person? They have to deal with the issue of whether or not the person who has assaulted them has given them any number of diseases, the most heinous of which is AIDS.
Jim Taves, a friend of Stephen Farmer, says testing should never have been brought into this case.
What happened to Stephen Farmer could happen to anybody. All you need is 2, quote, former friends who are willing to go to the public and say that at some point in time you were told that you had the HIV virus, and anybody, this can happen to anybody. That's the scary part.
The court has found that you knew.
Eventually, Farmer was forced to take the test. He tested positive. Farmer asked the court for leniency.
In the first publicity that hit in this case, I was depicted in that first piece as a rapist, a child beater, a child molester, and depicted me as the ultimate AIDS nightmare as well. I'd like to say that I'm not those things.
But the judge handed down an exceptional sentence, 7.5 years in prison, more than twice the normal term.
I think that's a completely outrageous, illogical, and an unscientific conclusion. From that test, you could determine nothing about Steve's status a year before. That doesn't corroborate anything. Forced HIV testing is going to drive people underground. I think the lesson that people have learned in this case is don't get tested, and that's the message the prosecutor's office has conveyed. Don't get tested because it could be used against you at some point in the future.
I get concerned about listening to some members of the community, and specifically the defendant complaining about his rights being trampled when he had no regard for the rights of the kids that he picked up and engaged in sexual contact with. Everyone has civil rights, including them, and those seem to have been submerged to him and his own rights.
Public attitudes about AIDS also had an impact on 25-year-old Ken Johnson. When Ken was diagnosed with AIDS, he had just moved to Seattle, recently divorced and the father of a little girl. He kept his condition a secret because of the social stigma of the disease.
Most of my friends that I had didn't know how to react. You know, the reaction was real hard for them, and so they stayed away, and most of them don't even come around anymore.
Later, when Ken became seriously ill, he decided to be open about his condition, even though he feared his ex-wife might try to prevent him from seeing his daughter.
The fact that I'm young, and the fact that I have a daughter that I don't get to see grow up, that's really hard, because that's something that I want to see that is being taken away from me. For one thing, you know, I'd have to go to court or something, and physically I can't do it. She lives far away, and I don't get to see her very much.
Ken is often too ill to see his daughter. AIDS has weakened his immune system, and as a result, he has caught a rare disease that has made him lose more than 30 pounds. He is totally dependent on a machine for survival.
What the machine does is it's my food, it's my nutrition. If I didn't have it, I'd starve to death. These are the medications that I take every day.
Ken's life is a daily battle against death, a battle he's winning so far, but at a high price.
You don't get much time for a good night's sleep or anything else because you got to get up every 4 hours and take these medications.
Twice in the past year, his heart stopped. His doctors gave him little chance of recovering, but he did.
I don't want to give up. I figure if there's ever going to be a cure, that I want to kind of be around for that. And I may have to deal with these machines and all these other things, but somehow it's worth it because I enjoy my life. And I just am not willing to give that up yet.
T-shirt and his leather vest.
Since moving to Seattle, Ken has made new friends. Friends who are as important to his survival as his machine and medicine.
They help me to deal with the fact that someday that I'm going to die from AIDS. And that's really nice because it's like I don't have to die alone. Hi, my friend.
Hi, how are you? Great. How are you?
When I got out of the hospital, I wasn't able to clean my house or do much for myself, and so I needed some help. And Tiffany was my first volunteer. And we've kind of been together so long that we've become friends. We talk and we share things, and she shares with me too. And besides that, she helps me, and she gets me out of the house, and we do things together. And it's nice to know that I have someone that I can depend on, and that she's always going to be there.
There are a lot of times when I can get very sad and very emotional when I think about losing Ken because we have such a great time together and such a unique bond, I think. I think my sadness is more for myself than for with Ken because I know there will come a point when he's tired and wants to stop being ill. But I don't think he's ever going to be too far away, so that is kind of consoling to me. But there are times when I'm very, very sad. I don't like that. I don't like being sad. I don't like thinking of him going.
I have accepted the fact that I'm going to die, it's real hard when you have to go and make your own funeral plans and you know that you're going to collect on that in the future here.
This is the specific location of your grandfather's grave.
Okay.
And what they're telling us is that this space is available.
Sometimes you get tired of going through all this stuff and you get tired of dealing with people's reactions and response to this disease. You offer them a cup of coffee, a glass of water, and they don't take it. You begin to wonder, why aren't they taking it? And they're afraid that they're going to catch something from just being in your house and being around you.
Recently, he decided to tell his ex-wife he had AIDS. To his relief, she agreed to let him continue seeing his daughter.
I go and see her as much as I can, but I don't like to see her when I'm in the hospital. I don't want her to come and see me. I guess I don't want her to remember her dad sick and dying.
But visits with his daughter have become more rare as AIDS continues to erode his health. Not long ago, Ken was admitted to the hospital for the 16th time, suffering from dizziness, blurred vision, and severe headaches. Tests revealed a small spot in his brain.
It could have something to do with a small tumor or something like that, but right now they just don't know. There is times where I would like it to stop, because I get tired of going through it.
Nothing's gonna harm you, not while I'm around. Nothing's gonna harm you, no sir, not while I'm around.
When I first got sick with AIDS, the problem I went through was the fact that people did not want to even give me hugs or even be near me, and that was really hard for me. And I hate to see anybody else go through that. I think the main thing is don't be afraid to love or touch someone who has AIDS.
Someday, I may have my own place of honor on this living memorial. If I do, I ask of you but one thing. Remember my name, too. Please, remember my name. My name is Michael Katz.
Michael Katz will have a panel on this quilt. He died this past September, but his message of compassion will live on. Each unique panel, each name, a powerful symbol of people struggling with dignity against this fearsome disease. Each name calling to us, remember my name. This enormous cloth will not only memorialize them, it will always serve as a reminder of how we as Americans pulled together as one nation in the face of this epidemic. I'm Edward Olmos. Thank you for joining us.